Hey, Bob.
They need to reduce their population, so it's a good idea.
As long as it dictates.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the City of Green Council meeting. Today's Tuesday, February 26th. It's 2019. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Sure. Mrs. Babbitt?
Here.
Mr. Dyer?
Here.
Mr. Humphrey?
Here.
Mr. Shaughnessy?
Here.
Mr. Speight?
Here.
Mr. Yeargin?
Here.
Mr. Young?
Here. The next item on our agenda is a council study session. It's approval of the February 12th, 2019 regular meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for the approval of the February 12th, 2019 regular meeting minutes. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item is the approval of the January 2019 financial report subject to audit.
So moved.
Point of order, Mr. President. I believe Mr. Shaughnessy has to abstain from that vote.
I did remain silent, if that helps, but
Okay.
yes.
Was that that was an intent?
That was my
abstention?
intent to
Okay.
abstain, thank you.
Proceed, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. So I believe I have a motion. Did I get a second?
Second.
Thank you.
You don't.
I have a motion and a second for the approval of the January 2019 financial report subject to audit. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is public report. We have one person signed in this evening to speak, Mr. Des Wertheimer.
I'll try and be brief. Des Wertheimer, 130 East Turkey Foot. The debate about, what was that? Sorry. The debate of, about Station 4, obviously we need it, but one location we may consider, the fire department for years has been trying to get the airport authority to have them take over full-time. Their firefighters, if you may not know, also do plowing and mowing, and it's kind of just a side department. The building is on the south side of the airport. It's already there, and we could put a rig there quickly, whether it's a engine or rescue, and it would cut the response time to the southwest corner, by a half at least, while we consider long-term locations for Station 4. So just another idea of a place to think. And then, just like the sheriff, we pay for the sheriff that covers the airport, possibly get the airport to offset some of the costs of the employees. So just an idea.
Thank you, Mr. Wertheimer. Is there anyone else here this evening who'd like to address council? Very good. The next item on our agenda is the reading of correspondence.
All right. We have the Civil Service Commission 2018 Report of Activities. Email from Troy McFadden regarding reimbursement for insurance deductible from pothole damage. And we've got a letter from Valerie Waxcar regarding baseball, softball field conditions. That's it.
Very good. Our next item is the reading of new legislation.
2019 R11, a resolution accepting the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the replat of Lot 1R of Heritage Crossings of Green, Phase 1, and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Planning and Economic Development Committee.
2019 R12, a resolution awarding a contract to North Star Asphalt, Inc. for the 2019 resurfacing project and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Transportation, Connectivity, and Stormwater Committee.
2019 R13, a resolution donating real estate owned by the City of Green to Summit County Land Reutilization Corporation for the purpose of demolition of the structures on the property and accepting the land from the Summit County Land Reutilization Corporation to the City of Green upon completion of the demolition and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President.
This will be referred to the Planning and Economic Development Committee. Mr. Yeargin.
Thank you, Mr. President. The administration has moved for first reading passage
This is legislation that we discussed in committee. It involves transferring 6423 South Main Street to a demolition company to demolish a structure at no charge to the city, and then it would be retransferred to the city. Mr. Weathy explained there's a timeliness issue and no harm to passing on first reading. So at this time, I would move to bypass the three reading rule on, bypass committee deliberations on 2019 R13.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to bypass committee deliberations on 2019 R13.
All in favor?
No, thank you. It was coming. It was just moving a little slow there. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
At this time, I would move to bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R13.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R13. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
And now I would move to adopt 2019 R13.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt 2019 R13. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Yeargin.
Yes.
Mr. Speight.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Shaughnessy.
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey.
Yes.
Mr. Dyer.
Yes.
Mrs. Babbitt.
Yes.
Adopted 7-0. Okay. 2019 R14, a resolution to enter into a memorandum of agreement for deposit of public funds, active, interim, and/or inactive deposits with Huntington National Bank and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Finance Committee.
2019-03, an ordinance amending rules of the Civil Service Commission of the City of Greene and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Rules and Personnel Committee.
2019-04, an ordinance establishing public notification requirements prior to City Council action authorizing city funds or authorizing the application for grants or other funding methods to be used for the design or construction of the master trail plan or similar long-range city development planning or portions thereof and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Planning and Economic Development Committee. The next item on our agenda is the report of council committees. The first committee to report this evening is the Finance Committee, chaired by Mr. Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee did meet this evening. Myself, Mr. Yeargin, and Mrs. Babbitt were present. We had one item of legislative business, and that was a second reading of 2019 R10. This is a resolution authorizing the transfer of funds from the unappropriated balance of the Pipeline Settlement Fund to Fire Station Number 3 construction account, making an appropriation and declaring an emergency. This is as amended as of this date. We had an opportunity to talk about this in committee quite extensively tonight. In fact, we began at 5. We didn't get out of committee until 6:20, and this was the only piece of legislation, so I'm not going to go over the entire debate again. But what the administration was attempting to do was to offer another look for council to have in terms of what do we want to do with the pipeline settlement funds. And really, before council at this point in time, there are really two real options. Number one, we can use the funds that were set forth for the building of Fire Station Number 3, and we can use all of those funds from the Pipeline Settlement Fund. Or, as the amendment came in tonight, we could set aside $3 million and earmark that in the future, subject to different priorities in the future, but certainly earmark it in the present for use for construction of Fire Station Number 4 in the future. That is not a fire station that will probably get built in the next couple of years, but it's certainly a fire station that every time we've studied it, eventually, based upon response times, that is a fire station that probably another council in the future will appropriate both the capital monies for and also the operating monies for. And so really, council has before it a choice of whether to move forward with the initial proposal or the amended proposal. I thought we had quite a good discussion, heard from individuals in the public who gave some feedback on it, and we are not voting on it this evening. This is the second reading, and so folks will have an opportunity to continue to contact their council person and come to our next meeting, because at our next meeting, that will be on third reading, and we'll be taking a vote on this piece of legislation. We had no items of old or new business, and we adjourned at 6:20 PM.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. The next committee that met was Environment and Parks, chaired this evening by Mr. Speight.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Mrs. Babbitt, and Mr. Shaughnessy were here. We did have one item of legislative business. That was 2019-02, an ordinance authorizing the selection of EnviroScience Incorporated as the firm to provide design-build services to the city for the design and construction of the city's Bettler Park stream restoration and stabilization, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Pickett gave us a good presentation on this. Basically, it is authorizing the expenditure of $300,000 to EnviroScience so they can reconstruct the streams going through Bettler Park. The streams are in desperate need of repair, and Mr. Pickett went into all the details about some of the work that would be proposed to be done. Also, as a reminder, there is a grant that would go with this, and it would be a 50% refund. So we spend the $300,000 when the project's complete. The Ohio Public Works Commission would refund $150,000 of that cost. This was second reading. We had a good discussion on it. If anybody has any questions, especially on council, I would recommend you go out and actually look at the streams, and you'll see what's there. I know the weather's not the most favorable right now to be out there, but I do recommend checking it out. Also in committee, we heard under new business, the mayor had told us about the master trail plan and how he plans on postponing it and possibly waiting for the park survey that will be coming later this year. We did have some good discussion on that, and we'll see where it goes from there. Other than that, we adjourned at 7:03.
Thank you, Mr. Speight. The next committee that met this evening was Public Safety, chaired this evening by Mrs. Babbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Public Safety Committee did meet. All members were present. We had no items of legislative business. However, we received the Summit County Sheriff's January 2019 report, as well as the Green Fire Department 2018 Summary of Activity Report, and we were adjourned at 7:18.
Thank you, Mrs. Babbitt. The next committee that met this evening was Planning, Community, and Economic Development, chaired by Mr. Yeargin.
Thank you, Mr. President. We did meet tonight. Myself, Mr. Speight, and Mr. Young were present. We had one item on second reading. It was 2019-01, an ordinance declaring a portion of improvements to a certain parcel of real property owned by Arlington Ridge Townhomes LP to be a public purpose, exempting 100% of the value of the improvements from real property taxation for 30 years and declaring an emergency. This was discussed tonight in committee, and it involves the use of a TIF for this development. It's on second reading passage, so we will ask for time.
Time will be granted.
I did give a quick report on the Planning Commission meeting of February 20th, which was highlighted by the announcement that a Chipotle will be coming to Heritage Woods Crossing across from CVS. And our committee adjourned at sometime after 7.
Thank you, Mr. Yeargin. The next committee that met was Rules and Personnel, chaired by myself. Present was Mr. Dyer and Mr. Humphrey. We had 2 items of legislation this evening. In both of these items, a second reading passage has been requested. The first item, 2019 R06, a resolution authorizing the City of Greene to enter into an agreement with Voyers, Sater, Seymour and Pease, LLP, to provide specialized legal services in the area of labor and employment for the purpose of contract negotiations and declaring an emergency. This piece of legislation will hire a law firm to conduct contract negotiations between the city and our collective bargaining unions. This was discussed in committee, and the committee agreed to a second reading passage. So at this time, I make a motion to bypass the 3 reading rule on 2019 R06.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R06. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. At this time, I make a motion to adopt 2019 R06.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt 2019 R06. Will the clerk please call the rolls?
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Dyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Babbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey?
Yes.
Mr. Shaughnessy?
Yes.
Mr. Speight?
Yes.
Mr. Yeargin?
Yes.
Adopted 7-0.
Thank you. Our next item is 2019 R07, a resolution authorizing the City of Green to enter into an agreement with Zashin and Rich Company, LPA, to provide specialized legal services in the area of labor and employment for the purpose of contract negotiations and declaring an emergency. This piece of legislation was also discussed in committee. It's very similar to the piece of legislation we just passed. This one is negotiations between the city and the firefighters union. And second reading passage was also requested. So at this time, I make a motion to bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R07.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R07. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. At this time, I make a motion to adopt 2019 R07.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt 2019 R07. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Dyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Babbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey?
Yes.
Mr. Shaughnessy?
Yes.
Mr. Speight?
Yes.
Mr. Yeargin?
Yes.
Adopted 7-0.
We had no other business, and we were adjourned. The next committee to meet this evening was Transportation, Connectivity, and Stormwater, chaired this evening by Mr. Shaughnessy.
Thank you, Mr. President. All members were present, myself, Mr. Young, and Mr. Yeargin. However, we had no items of legislation to discuss, so we did not meet.
Very good. The next committee that met was Intergovernmental and Utilities Committee, chaired by Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Mr. Shaughnessy, and Mr. Speight were here, but we did not have any items of business, so we didn't meet.
Thank you. The next committee that met was the Charter Amendment Implementation Committee, chaired this evening by Mr. Yeargin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Mr. Babbitt, and Mr. Shaughnessy were present, and we did meet. We had Miss Babbitt, excuse me. It's been a long evening. Myself, Miss Babbitt, and Mr. Shaughnessy were present. We had one item on second reading, and that was 2019 R05, a resolution authorizing the City of Green to enter into an agreement with Walter Haverfield LLP to provide specialized legal services with respect to a citizen-initiated amendment to the city charter requiring the City of Green's law director to be an elected position and declaring an emergency. We did discuss this at length in committee. I would point out that this is as amended, and Mr. Chris has added the amended language as Exhibit A. The most important language we read in committee, and I'll read that again for the public because there has been concern on the scope of employment and what Walter Haverfield was hired to do. It states, Walter Haverfield shall provide legal guidance to assist the commission in drafting language to implement ballot issue 14, which mandated the City of Green law director shall be both elected and an elector of the City of Green. Walter Haverfield is not retained, nor will it assist in efforts to overturn ballot issue 14. In addition, there was added a limit to the spending for Walter Haverfield of $30,000, and all of those amendments were discussed at committee. So at this time, I would move to suspend or bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R05.
As
Second.
amended, right?
As amended, thank you.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second to bypass the three reading rule on 2019 R05 as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
At this time, I move to adopt as 2019 R05 as amended.
Second.
Point of order, with the law director. Should we read in the amended title, or is it enough to have that listed there?
I don't think it matters, but
Okay.
it'd be
I'm
good
happy
read
to
it in.
read, I'm happy to read in the amended title. The amended title reads, "A resolution authorizing the City of Greene to enter into an agreement with Walter Haverfield LLP to provide specialized legal services and guidance in assisting council and the Charter Review Commission in their recommendations for changes to the city charter, and to implement the citizen-initiated amendment to the city charter, requiring the City of Greene's law director to be an elected position and declaring an emergency."
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to adopt 2019 R05 as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Yeargin,
Yes.
Mrs. Babbitt,
Yes.
Mr. Dyer,
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey,
Yes.
Mr. Shaughnessy,
Yes.
Mr. Speight,
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Adopted 7-0.
Very good. The next item, oh, I'm sorry. Was that the end of your report there?
Yes, that's the only item of legislation that was before our committee, and our committee then adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Yeargin. The next item on our agenda is the mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few upcoming events I'd like to share. First of all, on Saturday, March 2nd, at 11 a.m., the Acme will be celebrating Ohio's birthday. So if you do the math, we were incorporated in 1803, so that's our 216th birthday. So it'll be interesting to see how many candles they have. Once again, that's this Saturday, March 2nd at 11 a.m. Next Tuesday, March 5th, our Drug Task Force will be hosting the second in our speaker series from Summa Health, and this will be simple ways to reduce surgery downtime. That will be at 6 p.m. at the Central Administration Building, which is right here. And I think they'll be talking about reducing our reliance on opiates, so if you can join us, that would be great. And the next day, on Wednesday, March 6th, will be a Drug Task Force faith-based committee meeting, well, that's hard to say, at 7:30 at the Lodge at Briar Creek. Just so you know, quarterly we meet with the clergy in the City of Greene to talk about issues. And last year, we started our first Crisis Awareness Sunday, so I think at our meeting this week, we'll be finalizing our plans for our second annual Crisis Awareness Sunday to be held later in April. And then on Thursday, March 7th, I'll be attending a meeting where Virginia Adicott, President and CEO of FedEx Custom Critical, will be receiving the 2019 H. Peter Berg Community Leadership Award from the American Red Cross of Summit, Portage, and Medina counties. This award is presented each year to one or more people who best exemplifies leadership in the community, compassion for its people, and dedication to humanitarian mission of the Red Cross. And finally, on Saturday, March 9th, Mencius Brothers will celebrate their 25th anniversary, and there'll be a dedication at 12:30 in the afternoon. That's all I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there any new or unfinished business?
Mr. President, just really quick, I wanted to mention that the work on Walter Haverfield, I thought was a fine example of the legislative process working its way out. There were a lot of concerns, but there were everybody worked well together to try to alleviate those concerns. I want to especially thank Rocco and Mr. Chris and the mayor and everybody who was willing to work with everybody to try to make that more palatable. And the fact that it probably didn't have the votes to pass a week ago, the fact that it passed 7-0, I think is a testament to the legislative process working here, and I look forward to more of that.
Very good.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Mr. President,
Oh.
real quick, one more. This past weekend was the Green Schools Foundation Celebration of Education, outstanding event, well attended by many in the community. I'd like to thank Green Schools Foundation and Green Local Schools, Green Chamber of Commerce in the city for all of the hard work. I mean, it really was an excellent example of a community collaboration between all those entities, so thank you.
Anyone else?
You know what?
Actually, I do.
Mrs. Babbitt, please.
Sorry.
I would just like to
started this.
commend the city on the way that they kept everyone notified with all the road closures and everything else that went on with the high winds that we recently had. So I just want to say thank you for keeping us informed of what was going on and letting us know when roads were open again, and just generally handling tough situation with the damage caused by the wind.
one more.
Please.
I'd like to congratulate Green's mock trial team who placed and will be going down to the state tournament. As president of the Akron Bar Association, I was able to give them their award and awards for some of their best lawyers and best witnesses. They did a fine job. Thank you.
Very good. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.